Hey, this is Greg, and welcome back to this four-part programming series on how to code a classic snake game. In the first two parts of this series, which I'll link up above and then also down below in the comments, we created our game board grid system, we added our snake head, we built out a movement system for the snake, and we came up for a way to randomly add food to our stage. When the snake eats that food, we add body segments and make sure they follow our snake around the screen. Now, in this part 3, we will move on to things like game levels, snake speed, growth rate, scoring bonuses, and game testing. So let's jump right back in where we left off and continue to code out this classic snake game. Okay, so let's get into some more changes and gameplay elements. So I'm just going to come back here, and we have it so if the snake body ever touches itself, so if the snake head ever tries to cross back and hits another body segment, it's going to die. But I actually want it to die also if it hits the edge of the stage. So I'm going to do is come to this operator up here, the operators menu, and there should be an or under here. So I'm going to change this to if touching snake body, and then I'll just bring this down where I can see it. Let me get to where I can see it to here. Just give me a second. Drag that over. I'm going to duplicate that block there. And also if touching edge, and that'll be just if it's touching the edge of the screen. So now if I drag that in there, now I'm handling both conditions, if it's touching the snake body segment, but then also if it's touching the edge of the screen. So now if I do that now, we can just test that real quick and see that yes, if I go all the way up and touch the top, it's also going to end the game that way too. So that was a quick change. Now let's get into a few gameplay elements that I want to add to this game. The snake game in and of itself, I feel like can be a little repetitive and get a little boring. So I want to do some things to introduce a little bit more variability and a little bit more excitement for the player. So to do this, I'm going to start and I'm going to introduce a few new variables. So I'm just going to go over to the backdrops here, and I'm going to make a few global variables. So let me come in here and down to variables. And the first variable I'm going to make is, I'm just going to call this current level to keep track of the level the player is on. So I'm going to have it so they can advance through levels in the game. And as they get to higher levels, I'm actually going to change the number of body segments that get added each time you eat a food pellet. And I'm also going to change the speed of the snake. So the game gets a little tougher by the snake getting longer and the snake starting to go faster. So the first variable I need for that is going to be current level. But I'm going to add a couple more. I'm going to go in here, and this one, I'm going to call this one growth rate. Okay. And then let's add one more variable, and let's call this food counter. And we'll go ahead and click OK. Now let's set up initial conditions for each of these variables. So we have some variables here, but let's drag out this, and then we're just going to duplicate this twice. And then we'll change this to the appropriate. So current level will start the game at level 1. And then we're going to come down here to growth rate. That will start at 1. And then food counter, we're going to start the game with that at 0. So I'll just drag all these down here and drop them in here. And so now we have initial conditions that are set for each of these variables as soon as the green flag is clicked. So I think the way I want this to work, I think I want every time the player consumes 10 food, I think I want it to advance a level. And when it advances a level, I want both the growth rate and the speed of the snake to increase. But just for testing purposes, I'm going to come back to that growth rate in a minute. To that food counter in a minute. So for starting purposes, I'm just going to do some experimenting here to make sure that I can get the functionality to work the way I want. And one other thing I thought of here, the snake body, it's all just that green costume that we've created here, but I thought it would be a little bit more interesting if we had a snake that was colorful and if it sort of had random colored body segments. So I think we can add something like that pretty easily if we just go back to our code here. And this is when I started clone, and we have show. And so if I come in here and I just come down to this looks here, and I use this change color effect. Actually, let me use the set color effect. Set color effect. So this is just one of those random abilities that's built into Scratch. And so I'm going to use operator here and generate a random number. And we'll just set it to between 1 and 200. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this. So every time a body segment is created, it starts as a clone. It's going to randomly set the color here. And so let's just test that out real quick just to see how that works. And this is just to make it more interesting again for the player. And again, I have some variables sort of hiding the food here, but let's see if I can find it anyways. There we go. And so we can see that that body segment came up just sort of as a random color here. Now, I can come in here and do things like adjust the brightness of that initial costume if I'm not loving the colors that are showing up here. Now, it is this cool random color effect, but I think maybe this could be a little bit more brighter, a little bit more vivid than the color is currently. So it is definitely working, but I could come in here and tweak this a little farther by going into that initial costume and making a few changes with that. So let me just stop this, and then also I'm just going to come down here and we'll hide those variables for now because I don't need to see those on screen when I'm testing the game. But so let's come and, again, like I said, if I could go to the snake body, I come to this initial costume here, and I didn't want to put that on screen, so let me just get rid of that. Well, there we go. Select that. And then here, if I come in here and just take this initial brightness, I'm just going to pump that up because I want this to be pretty vivid. So something like that. And again, I'm just going to test this again. Small little change, but now all those color effects are going to carry through that new brightness level. So this should just make things a little brighter. And see, that one was a tough placement in the corner there. So that was a tough one to get, and I actually died. So let's try this again. Start this game and eat a few just to check out this color effect. And you can experiment with this as much as you want, but for me, it's just, I'm not going to spend too much time on it now. The idea is just to give these random colors to the new body segments, and it's going to make your snake look a little cooler. So I just think that's a cool random effect to add to the game, and it's really easy to add. So that looks pretty good. So we're just going to stop there, and we'll come back there. Now, let's talk about increasing that growth rate and advancing levels. So first of all, if I come to food here, and let me go back to my code, and I have here define place foods, and every time here when the snake head touches the food, so let's do this, move snake, and here's the forever if touching, that's the end game, but here's the move snake, forever move snake, and I think on the food is where I'm actually, here we go, here's where we're testing. On the food, forever if touching head, then we're changing the number of body segments by 1. We're broadcasting eat food, and we're broadcasting this growth snake. So this is where the snake actually grows. And then so I could also do something in here like this right here is where I know we're eating this food, this eat food. So if I went into that eat food here on my stage where I have when I receive eat food, I could do something like if I was iterating that food counter, every time I got to 10, I could make it advance a level. But just for testing purposes, let's make it every time we eat food, it's going to advance a level. So I'll just come in here and I'll change current level by 1. So that's going to make it go up each time. And then let's use the current level as a way to increase the speed every time the level goes up. So if you remember, on the head of the snake here, we're actually controlling the speed of our snake with this weight block here. So if we lower the weight here, in effect, we're increasing the speed with which our snake's going to move across the screen, because this is going to fire, this move snake's going to fire more frequently. So instead of having 0.05, let's do something like this. So I'm going to come under operators and choose this minus, and I'm going to go 0.05. But then each time they make it smaller, we're going to subtract the level. But we don't want to just subtract the level because that's going to make it too small here. So let's do something where it's a little bit more subtle. So this just takes a little experimenting around when you're doing something like this. But I think what I found works was current level times 0.005. And so we're going to subtract this small value each time. And so our speed is going to get changed for our weight block. Instead of that 0.05, we're going to use 0.05 minus current level times 0.005. Okay, so let's just test this out, and this should be increasing each time we eat food, because every time we eat food here, we have it advancing a level. So if we come in here, when I receive eat food, we have change current level by 1. Okay, so this should work, but let's just come in here to confirm. So if I do this, I should be able to get my snake to go faster each time. And it definitely looked like the speed increased, but let's just go through a few more examples. Now, I died again trying to get this one at the edge, and so if you're finding that your game is too difficult, you could adjust that random placement script and have them not put blocks right at the edge, but it is kind of an interesting game element. So I think for now, I'm gonna keep that in here. But let me test this again because I do want to see and make sure that my speed is increasing every time. And again, I'm going to have it where you have to eat like 10 pellets to advance a level, but now just for experimenting, I have it built in here. And so I can see that yes, it is definitely getting faster. So as I eat food pellets, it's definitely getting faster. And so my snake's moving faster and faster. So you can imagine as you progress through this game, it's going to be harder and harder to navigate your snake around without running into yourself, without accidentally crossing back over your path. So it's just an interesting game element. So that speed variable definitely appears to be working. And I could have, one thing I could do, which I haven't done yet, but it would probably be a smart thing to do, if I went back to this initial head variable here, the head of my snake, this one here, where I have this right here, I could turn all of this into a variable. And so I could have the variable update each time. So it could start as 0.05, but then I could have it change each time. So I'm not going to do that right now, but that would be a smart thing, maybe just to store that as a variable. And if I did that, then I could display it on screen and just test that it's working, but I can see it's working. So you don't have to define everything as a variable in your game when you could just do the equation. If you're going to be using something over and over, then it would be a good idea to use a variable. Sometimes it helps you stay more organized. So that's just a judgment call. I'm just going to leave it like this for now. But so the other thing I want to have happen is I want to change the number of body segments. So that's where I'm going to use that growth rate. If you remember right now, I just set the growth rate to 1 at the beginning of the game. So growth rate equals 1. But then what I could do is, again, every time we eat the food, and I may have this end up being part of like a level up block or something, but right now for testing purposes, I'm just coming back under the stage and where I have this eat food, and I have changed current level by 1. So let's duplicate that, and let's also change the growth rate by 1. So now we're changing the growth rate by 1. So then when I add the segments of the snake and I grow the snake, so right here I have create clone of snake body. Well, what if we just did something like this, where we came under our control group here and we did a repeat, and we did a repeat 2 times, and we drag that within here. And actually I didn't want to repeat 2 times. I wanted to use my variable. That's where I wanted to drag my growth rate. So what if I did repeat growth rate, and then I'll drag that back under here. And so when I receive grow snake, depending on the growth rate, it's going to go through and create that number of clones. Now, it's worth mentioning that if I was always going to have my level and growth rate change at the same rate, which they are currently, then I could just use level here instead of growth rate, and I would only need 1 variable. But by having 2 variables, it does give me flexibility if I ever want to adjust the level and growth rate separately. So I can leave it like this, but I do see one thing that's missing here, because anytime the snake body increases, I also have to make sure that I'm adding to the number of body segments and keeping track of that. And I think I have that over here on snake body. Let's see, let's go look at this code. Actually, that would be on, let's just see, that would be on the food here. So anytime I receive start game forever, it's checking if I'm touching the head, and it's changing the number of body segments, broadcasting eat food, and broadcasting grow snake. But this number of body segments here, that would actually be better within this grow snake sort of check block we have on the next page. So let me just take that out of there for a second. Let's put that back in here. And then this change number of body segments, I'm just going to throw out for a second, because we're going to come over here and we're actually going to put that within here. So here I will come in here and we'll create clone. And every time we create the clone, then right after that, that's when we should change the number of body segments by 1. And so now that's going to help with the placement, because you have to have those body segments for when we actually start as a clone. So if I come back to the body itself, if you remember, when I start as a clone, it's using that body segments in this positioning grabbing of the index. So let's just test this now to see if it's working. So I'm going to start the game, and I'll eat this first thing, and I grow by 1. But when I eat again now, I just grew by 2 segments. Now I grow by 3. And so you see now we have this growth rate where we can add multiple body segments at a time because of that growth rate. So this is really pretty cool. I think this is going to be a nice element of the game, because now we have the ability to advance levels. And as we advance levels, we can both increase the speed and we can also increase the growth rate. Okay, so for testing here, I just had it advancing your level every time you eat a food pellet, but I don't want to do that. I want to start using this food counter. So let me come back in under the food here, and we are testing if touching head, broadcast eat food. And so then within that eat food, let's go back to our stage there, and we have this when I receive eat food. Instead of changing the current level by 1, let's have it change that food counter by 1. Remember, the food counter starts the game at 0. So if I have this food counter, it's 0 at the start of the game. So every time I eat food now, it's going to advance to 1. And so with that in place, it should slowly count up to 10, so that then what happens is I need to be checking if I ever reach 10. And if I reach 10, I'm going to set my food counter back to 0, so it'll start counting again. And I'm also going to then advance my level. So to make all of that work, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and I'm going to go under my events, and I'll do a when green flag is clicked. And I could also do this and connect this actually to when the game starts, but it doesn't matter. When green flag is clicked, I guess to be a little bit more correct, that wouldn't run until the actual game started. So I could do and put this under a when I receive start game would work also. So when I receive start game, so I'll do another when I receive start game. And every time, once we're in the game here, so start game, we're going to run a forever loop. And so I'm going to come under control, grab a forever loop. And within this forever loop, I wanted to check and see if I have reached that food counter equals 10. So let me come in here under my operators and grab this one here, and then my variable down here, food counter. If food counter equals 10, and if I have reached 10, remember, I want to then set the food counter back to 0 so it can start counting up again. And so we'll send food counter back to 0. So we'll grab this one here, and we'll set the food counter back to 0. And then I also want to broadcast a next level message, because when I reach 10, I want to then advance to another level. So I'm going to broadcast a new message. So under events here, I will broadcast, and I'll do a new message here, and we're going to call this message new level. So let me click in this box here, and new level. Okay, so again, it's always going to be checking once the game starts if we've reached this condition, and if we have reached where food counter equals 10, then it's going to set food counter back to 0, and it's also going to broadcast this new level message. And so then what I can do is drag out the block here when I receive, and this time we're going to do next level, that next level message, or new level is what I called it. So when I receive new level, and then that's where under the eat food, where we were changing the food counter by 1, where we're changing the growth rate by 1, we actually want the growth rate to change under here. And then also you'll remember when we were under our eat food, we were iterating our level here. So where were we iterating our level? Let me just remind myself, going back to the head, this is where we're actually controlling the speed here. And so current level times 0.005. So at one point I had that current level block getting iterated. I'm just trying to make sure I don't miss that. So set current level to 1, change growth rate. I don't know that I have the current level still in here changing by 1, but just to test all this, if you lose track, you can always turn these variables on here. So here's current level, here's my food counter, here's my growth rate. So let's just run an example with this real quick just to see. So start game. Okay, so current level is 1. I eat something, it stays at 1, growth rate stays at 1. Body segments, it's just adding 1. And so it seems to be working the way we want it. And of course I have that food counter going up. Now, it's placing something up here. So for testing purposes, I could make this a lot easier. So I could do something like come out of here. And so it's just randomly placing those food pellets right now. But it'd be a lot easier to me right now if it was sort of replacing things in the center of the screen. So I'm just going to go 20, 23. I'm just giving it a very narrow 15, 17. So now the food's going to be placed all close together for me, just for testing purposes. Let's just run through this again. And we'll start game. And so here we go. Food counter to 1. Food counter to 2. Food counter to 3. Food counter to 4. Food counter to 5. 6. There's 7. There's 8, there's 9, and there's 10. So it reset it, it changed our growth rate. However, I don't have it updating the level. So let me just come back here and we'll change this level to, let me stop this for a second. And so here on the stage where we have this new level, we have to change growth rate. We also have to change the level by 1. So change current level by 1. And then also, I'm going to make this a lot smaller just for testing purposes. So let's just make this 4. We can change it back, but because we structured it this way, it's easy to change how many pellets it takes to make a new level. But for now, let's make it 4. So let's test this again. So every time I get to 4 pellets, I should go to a new level. 2, 3, 4, and then my growth rate should increase, so I should be getting 2 body segments now each time. And then I should advance again here. And so now I'm up to a growth rate of 3 and current level 3. So this counter definitely seems to be working the way we want it to. And you'll notice that my snake is growing at a much faster rate as I advance through the levels. Okay? So this is how we do this sort of game testing, and you can adjust the variables and then eventually set them to what you want them to be in the game. But while you're testing, you may find that some different values make this a little easier to keep track of. Alright, so you can see how things are getting faster and your growth rate is increasing, so all these things are going to add to gameplay. Okay, now let's back out of this and let's talk about score and how we want to keep track of score. Because in a lot of games, and at times in a snake game like this, you would just have score be the number of food pellets you ate, and every time you ate one, your score would go up 1. But that's kind of boring. That's been done before. I want to come up with a way to make the scoring this game much more dynamic, much more interesting for the player. So let's talk about what we want to do here. Okay, so I don't have a score variable yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and make a score variable. It'll be available to all sprites because I'm creating it here on the stage. So go ahead and call that score, and we'll go ahead and click OK. Now, all these things here, some of these counter variables and stuff, I realized that instead of putting them in when green flag is clicked, I really should have them in when I start game. And the reason why I should have them when I start game, because imagine if eventually I have like a high score or end game screen, but then you can start a new game without actually going back into clicking the green flag again. And in that situation, I would still want all these to reset. So let me just do a little housekeeping real quick first. So I'm going to just come in here under events, and I'm going to do when I receive start game. And then I'm going to go ahead in here and change some of these. So I want to delete all this. I want to do all this. Pretty much all of these here that I have under here, I can pretty much take all these and move them over and put them under this when I receive start game. And I also want to add the new one that we just did. So I'm also going to set the score. So I'll drag that in here. So I just set up this score. So we want to also just initialize score with a value of 0. So score is going to be set to 0 when the game is started. And then anytime I eat food, that's when I'm going to iterate the score. So I'm going to do change score. But actually what I'll do is, change score. So let me just duplicate this. And so change score by, and so I could just start with something simple like, let me go under my operators and choose this multiplier here, multiplication. And so maybe every time I eat a food pellet, it's just going to change the variable by 10 times the current level. So you're going to score more points as you advance through levels. So I'll just go up 10 times level. So I need to grab that level variable. So 10 times level. So let's see, current level, 10 times current level. So right now, every time you eat a food pellet, it's going to go 10 times current level. Let me try to get that. So there we go, 10 times current level every time I eat food. Now, just to test that and have it be easier to test, let's set this down to 1. So every time we eat a food pellet now, it's going to advance to a new level. And so the first pellet I eat should be 10 points, and then it should start to advance up. And I realize now that I had this little recording bar up here the whole time. Excuse that, but I'm going to go ahead and continue this and go ahead and hit this play here for testing, start game. And so anytime I eat a food, we should see the score go up 10. Oops, it went up a whole bunch there. Let me just stop for a second. So we see that my score stayed at 0 and the food counter went up to 33. I think that's an indication that I swapped my variables down here. So yeah, I have this change food counter. I of course wanted that to be change score 10 times current level. So let's just go in here and let's test this again real quick. So we'll go ahead and hit play, hit start, score and food counter both set back to 0. Now if I go in here 10 for the first one, then I should go up to 30. Now after this I should go up to 60. After this I should go up to 100. So yes, now it does seem like that is working. Okay, so that's sort of the base way we're going to keep track of our score. But then I want to put in something which I'm going to call sort of like a bonus multiplier, where there's a way for the player to greatly increase his score. And so I'm going to talk about that now, the mechanics of that. Okay, before we get into the bonus, I want to actually start displaying my score on screen here in a little bit different fashion. Right now we're just using the score variable, which you can turn on and off, but that's not a very dynamic way to show a score on screen. So I have another video where I talk about a dynamic way to build out a score using sprite costumes. So that's the method I'm actually going to use. But if you want to see in detail how to do this method, I'll link it up above there in the upper right or down below in the description of this video. I'll link the full tutorial on how to do this, but I'll go through it really quickly. But if you want it in detail, you can follow one of the links. So what I've done before is I've stored in my backpack. Now at the bottom of your Scratch screen, you always have this backpack which you can expand, and you can drag code in there, you can drag sprites in there. And if you drag a sprite in there, it'll carry along all the code that comes with that sprite. So what I've done is dragged in this score 2 sprite, which I will now drag out in this project and place here. And so it's going to make the sprite, it's going to carry through all the costumes, it's going to carry through all the code. So let's look at the costumes real quick, and we could just see that all it does is contain the digits 0 through 9, and I'm going to use these digits to dynamically build out the digits and whatever our score happens to be within the game. Now if I go over to the code, I will need to clean this up a little bit because I probably did it a little different with different variables on the last project I was using this on. See, I have a duplicate here, so I don't need that duplicate. Let me just get rid of some of these extra things that we have in here, just so I don't have the distractions of these. Okay, but so you can see is what this does is it has those 10 costumes with the different number digits, and when it receives the score update broadcast message, what it does is it gets rid of any existing clones that make use of that, and then it starts this draw score. And when it goes into draw score, it's going to go through and it's going to check the length of score. So in other words, how many digits are in the string. So if it was the number 100, then that would have 3 digits. So it's going to walk through each of those digits. It's going to figure out the letter. It's going to figure out the corresponding costume. It's going to switch the costume to that. It's going to create a clone of itself for that costume. And then we're going to see it on screen. Okay. So let's just see, I have to change a couple variables. So it's using this score variable, which is our global score variable. That's what we had called it here. But down here, this snake X is something that I didn't necessarily have in this game. But so if I come under my variables now, you'll see because I brought this over, it built out this snake X and snake Y. Now we can see because it doesn't give a preceding sprite name, we can see that yes, these are global variables. And this snake X and snake Y, I'm going to use to store the X and Y position of the head. And I need to do that because I'm going to show the score based on the position of that head. And for this sprite here to be able to access that, it has to have it stored in a global variable. In other words, if I come back over here to the head, I know that under these looks block or motion blocks here, I have ones for the X position and I have ones for the Y position, but these are local variables for this head sprite. So this X position and Y position, the only way for me to get them over here to score 2 is if I'm constantly updating them into some sort of global variable. Well, I can easily do that in one of my forever loops. So when I start game, here's this forever loop. And so in that forever loop, I'm just also going to set these variables. So let me grab this and I'm going to pull out a set block here and another set block. And we'll come down and we're going to set that snake X to the X position of the snake. And we're going to set that snake Y to the Y position of the snake. We'll snap those together and we'll just bring this up here and make sure that I throw this in this forever loop. So when I receive start game, forever it's checking to see if things are touching there, but then it's also doing this set X and set snake Y. So those variables should exist now. So if I come back over to this little script here, now when it's saying go to snake X and Y, it's going to the position of the head of the snake, and then I have some adjustments going on here for the positioning because different digits as you get farther along should appear adjacent to the previous digit. So let's just run this real quick and see what happens. So nothing's going to show until we actually eat a food pellet. But then once I do, we see that now we have our score dynamically flying alongside of us. And this is just a much cooler way to display your score than just having the above variable, which takes up screen real estate that we're going to want for our game. Now again, that's the really quick way on how to do this. If you want to see the tutorial in detail on how to create a score sprite like this, you can just check the link above or the link down in the description. Okay, I had mentioned wanting to do a few other things with the score just to make it more dynamic in the gameplay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to come down and I'm going to create a new sprite. And again, we'll just paint this sprite ourselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab the little circle tool here and come in here and change the color to whatever we like, something like that. I'm not too worried about the color. We don't need an outline for this, so I'll choose that. And then I'll just come on screen here and with shift held down, I'm going to drag out a circle. Now I should have zoomed in a lot farther first because I don't want it to be so big. So let me zoom in now. I'm just going to size that down. And remember, we're talking about the 10 pixels. Oops, I did a second one. I don't want to do that. So you can do your select tool here to grab it. We're talking about a 10 by 10 grid. So I'm going to make this be no bigger than 10 pixels. So let's size it down to 9. That's fine. 9 pixels is fine. Actually, we'll make it 10. We'll make it 10. So there's 10 by 10. And again, zoom in if you're not sure. You can really see what's going on here. And then make sure you get it to snap to the center. So snap right there to the center. Now, to go along with this, the idea is I'm going to have multipliers that you can get at certain times. If you're fast enough within the game, they're going to randomly appear on the screen. And then you'll have a certain number of seconds to get them. And these multipliers will either multiply your score by 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. So let's start and let's drag out just a text indicator of that. So I'll just come here and we'll just take this all the way to white and I'll put a little text item here and we'll call this times 2. And of course this is way too big. So once I do that, I'll just come in here and let's see, where do we find her font size? You can actually just drag the corners and drag it down. So I'll just drag it down like that. So this will be our times 2. And again, once I've done that, it's going to be easy because I'm just going to duplicate. Then I'll come down here, click in here. This is going to be times 3. I'll duplicate this again. This will be times 4. And we'll duplicate that one more time. And this one's going to be times 5. Oops. I accidentally created a new character there. I don't want that, so those are times 5. Okay, so we've got costume 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so they don't it would be nice if costume 1 was times 1 and so on. So I could make it organized like that. But it's okay if you have it organized like this too. You just have to remember that the multiplier is 1 more than the costume number. Okay, so times 2, times 3, times 4, and times 5. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get it set it up so this will randomly appear on screen after a certain number of seconds. And then you're going to have to race to get to it. And if you get to it before it disappears, then you're going to multiply your entire score by this. So this has potential to really earn the player a lot of points. Okay, so next I will name that sprite that we just created costumes for. We're going to call this multiplier, since that's a common sense name that makes sense to us. And then what I'm going to do is I will come onto my stage here, and I'm going to start to set up the code for this. Okay, so it's on backdrops now. Let me come back over to code. And so this is my stage code. And so let's talk about what do I want to have happen when the game starts. I'm just going to grab another when received start game block just to keep it organized from the setting of these variables here. Again, you can have multiple blocks with the same heading if you want like this. So I'm just going to grab another one and when I receive start game because what I want is for I don't want this to necessarily appear on the screen as soon as the game starts, but I want a timer to start counting up. And I don't know if you are aware of this, but there is a sensing block in here that is a timer. So we can have this timer and you can turn this on at any point. So without even doing anything with it, you can see that we have this timer that's constantly running. And if I stop this game and restart it, the timer just starts at 0 and is constantly counting up from the moment you hit that green flag. So when the moment you hit the green flag, this timer is constantly counting up, and it's something that you can reset and you can make use of in your game. So we're going to make use of this timer variable that's built into Scratch, and we're going to use that to sort of control when we're going to place these bonuses on the screen. Okay, so I'll go ahead and turn it off now. We know that that is there, and we'll turn it on and off as we need to. But I'm going to come in here, and so first I'm going to set a new variable. So new variable, and we can just make this again a global variable. It's going to be fine, and we're going to call this multiplier timer, and we'll go ahead and click OK. And then for initial condition, which I guess maybe we will put up here, although for doing all of our timer code, maybe it does make sense to put it down here. So we'll come down here and we will set multiplier timer. So this is at the very start of the game. We're going to set this to a random number, and we're going to have it be between 10 and 30, because between 10 and 30 seconds is the interval when we want a bonus to show up. So in the first 10 seconds of the game, it's not going to be there, but then somewhere between the 10 and the 30 second, we're going to have that show up. And to have it show up, all we need to do is grab a forever loop here, and we're going to have it now check within here if timer. So let's use this if block here. If, and then we'll do a greater than block. So let's do operators, and let's grab this greater than, and let's see, let's try that again, greater than, and we'll drag that in there. So at any point in time, the timer itself becomes greater than this multiplier timer variable. So let's go and grab that multiplier timer. So remember, this is going to be set between something between 10 and 30, so maybe it's going to be 16. If then the timer becomes greater than this, then what we want to do is we want to display that bonus on screen. So what we're going to do then is we're just going to create a clone of multiplier, and then we also want to then reset the timer. So then we're going to go back to that timer, and we're going to reset timer using this reset timer block. And then we're going to have to set the timer again, but we're going to not want to give another option for a bonus until after they at least eat another food pellet or they get rid of this bonus timer here. So let's just test to see if this original code works in terms of getting the timer to show up on screen. And then we'll work on all the other mechanics after that. But let's go back to this multiplier code here, And what we'll do is we'll come in here and under controls, when I start its clone, we'll drag this out. And actually what we can do is as soon as it starts in a clone, we can reset that like we did for the other one. We can come in here and we can set, once again, we can set the multiplier timer, because remember we just reset the timer when we call this, when this is created. So we can set multiplier timer, and once again we can do a random number between 10 and 30. So 10 and 30, so once again it's going to reset that. And then we can also set the X position and the Y position, and again we can randomly place it on screen. And so I could use some set X and set Y blocks to set the position of this. So let me just come up under motion here, and I'm just going to choose set X and set Y. So we're going to use this to set the position of this. And now remember, the stage again goes from minus 240 to plus 240, goes from minus 180 to plus 180, but maybe we don't want it all the way on the edge of the screen. So here's what I'll do. I'll come in here and I'll grab these operators, and we're going to use pick a random number. We'll duplicate that because we're going to pick a random number each time. But then, so with random numbers, we're going to go minus 23 to 23, and then we're going to go minus 17 to 17. But then what we want to do is we're going to multiply this by 10. So this will take us from minus 230 to 230 on the screen. So it covers just about everything, but you're not going to be putting it right on the edge of the screen. So again, I'll grab another multiplier down here. Again, this is going to take it in the Y coordinate system from minus 177 to 170. But again, so not quite right on the edge of the screen. Just make it a little easier on the player. We could, of course, make this 24 if we wanted to. I'm just keeping it from not being right on the edge of the screen. And so then, let's see. Then I want to set the costume. And if you remember, we have those 4 different costumes. So I will come in here and I will come in here and I will have it looks, switch costume 2. And then once, well, it's like, let me just get a lot of blocks on screen here. Let's put that one up here. Let's put this one up here. And then for costume here, we're also going to use a random number. And it's going to just be random between 1 and 4, because remember we have 4 costumes. So random between 1 and 4. And then we also want to make sure, of course, that we're showing this. So we'll make sure that it shows. And then what I want to do is I want to have it quickly fade out. I only want a certain amount of time for the player to be able to reach this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a repeat block. So I'll come under control, and I'm going to try repeating this 100 times. And every time I do, I'm going to change the ghost effect. Basically, you can control the transparency of something with this ghost effect. So if I come under looks, we should see ghost effect. So I'm going to grab this change ghost effect. And what I'm going to do is under here, I'll choose ghost. And I'm going to change it by 1 each time we go through the loop. So this is going to get closer and closer. It starts at like 100, or actually it starts at 0. But when you get up to a ghost effect of 100, that's like something that is transparent that you can't see. So it's going to slowly make it less and less visible. And then eventually, when it reaches the bottom of that, what I want to do is just delete this clone. Now, we're going to need some other stuff in here to sense whether the player's touching, but let's just start to see if this part of the code is working. So let me just come in here, and we'll go ahead and we'll hit play. Now, by default, I'm not hiding it when we start out here, so let me go back and make sure I do that, because when we first start, of course, we want to hide this. So I'll come in here, and when the game starts, we want to make sure we hide that. So let me just come in here onto this. When I receive start game, and then we just want to make sure that for looks by default, this starts as hidden. Okay, and now let's expand this out again. Let's run this again. Let's start the game. It should get hidden. So unless it shows up under my stuff up here in the upper left, we should see, I'm just going to sort of move around here, and eventually we should see. There we go. So bonus in. So it shows up and it slowly fades out. And then after another 10 to 30 seconds, since we reset that timer, it should fire again. So let's just keep going around here. And let's see. I'll eat some as we go. But let's see if we see another bonus show up here. And again, I could make this a little bit more obvious, but there's another one. So it does seem to be working and randomly posting bonuses on screen here. So now that's a good starting point, and now we just got to start to connect this up with code so you start to actually have your score affected when you can actually get to and eat this bonus before it disappears. Okay, so we've got our multipliers appearing on screen, but now I need to connect up some code so we actually get that to start to work. So what I'm going to do is I'll come in here and I'll do another when I start as a clone here. So let's come in there and when I start as clone. So we have all this stuff going on here, but then I also want to be checking always to see if I'm touching the snake, right? Because if we're touching the snake head, then that's when the multiplier sort of gets eaten or rewarded to the player. So let's come in here under controls and let's grab one of these forevers, and then we're going to grab an if block, and then that if block will do this sensing and we'll go touching. And of course we're seeing if it's touching the head of the snake. So if touching head, and so what we're going to do is we're then going to broadcast a score update. So we're going to come in here and event, and we will broadcast a score update, which if you remember, the score update is what we are using here on this score sprite now to cause it to redraw the score on screen here. So we're going to broadcast that score update. Now, of course, it's using the global score variable, remember. So we have to make sure before we broadcast that we update the score. So we're going to come back over here and we're going to set the score before we broadcast this score. So if I come under my variable blocks, I'm going to choose one of these set, and we're going to set the score variable, and then we're going to set this to score. So let me grab a copy of score, and then we're going to need an operator here because it's going to be the costume number. But then if you remember, if we go back to our multiplier here and look at the costumes, remember that costume 1 was actually multiplier 2, costume 2 was actually multiplier times 3. So what I need to do then is when I come back here, it's actually going to be the costume number. So under looks, we should find that costume number somewhere in here, I believe. Let's see. Here we go, costume number. So costume number. Actually, I think I can just use, is there one that just says costume? Well, we'll see if this works. We'll see if this costume number here works. So costume number, but then we're going to be adding a 1 to that. So costume number plus 1, and we're going to be doing score. Shoot, all of this here. So I need another operator for another arithmetic here, because what it's going to be is score equals score times, excuse me, I need a times because we're multiplying this. So score times, so it's going to be the current score and multiplied times the costume number plus 1, right? So hopefully that makes sense. And I'll put that in there, and then right after that, we're going to broadcast this score update. And then once we do all that, we also want to delete this clone, so I can copy this here and duplicate that. Obviously, it can fade out and it'll get deleted, but if it gets eaten before it fades out, then we want it to delete before that. So this is if touching, it's going to delete. And the only thing we could do here is maybe I want to add a sound effect here. So I could come in under sound effects. I'll add a new one here, choose a sound. I think there was one in here that I'd found called coin or something. So something like, let's see. Why can I not read in alphabetical order? There we go. So CO right here. Yeah, so this coin sound here just sort of gives an indicator to the player like an audible signal that they've made it to the multiplier. So I'll choose this one here, and I'll come back into this code here, and we will go under sound, and right before we broadcast this, as soon as actually they're touching it, we will play sound coin. Right? So we have all that now. And so now you should be able to get it. You should be able to make it to it. And if you make it to it in time, you should actually be able to eat and consume the multiplier, and then it should actually update your score and then broadcast it to the score. But so let's go ahead and test this to see if this is working. So before I do that, let me just come in here and turn off a few of these variables just so we're not seeing all that stuff and blocking our gameplay screen. The other thing I could do is I could come in for testing purposes. It would be helpful to set these values lower. And I actually have them here on this, and I have them also when the game first starts. So when I have them in multiple places like that, when you're using something in the same place multiple times, or excuse me, in multiple places, the same block of code, that's when, maybe I should be using a variable there instead. But I'm not going to worry about that now. I'm just going to go ahead and get in here so I can actually get a feel for the gameplay. So I'm going to leave them as they are, and we're going to start this. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to eat this here. Now I have a score of 10. I eat another one, I have a score of 30 because I have the levels just leveling up automatically here. So there you see, I'm not going to be able to make it to that one, but there was a ×3 in the upper left. So now I should be on another timer, again waiting between 10 and 30 seconds before another one shows up. And actually, as you get farther in the game, it's harder to control your snake because you're going faster and faster, but that will make it a little bit more likely that you can make it to the bonus. That is, if you don't run over your own thing. So there's ×3, and did I go up? I think I went up. Has my score at 300 now. I should have been paying attention. So I went up to 300. Let me just wait for one more so I can confirm that it is updating my score. Pretty sure it worked there. Well, we're just going to do one more test. So again, I'm just sort of making my way around the screen here. There's a ×4, so let's see. I got that, and see now I went to 1200. So it does feel like that is working. So that's cool. So that multiplier is working. Now, you may have noticed a potential flaw that the player could exploit, and that would be if I just keep putting bonuses on the screen, and they're always going to show up after 10 or 30 seconds, even if the player isn't growing their snake by eating more food pellets, then they could just hang out and get bonus after bonus after bonus after bonus without, having the difficulty of getting their snake body getting in the way because they're growing longer. So we do want to build in that check, but I do like the bonus system, and it is working. So we're just going to have to build in some sort of check to make sure it can't be exploited, but I do think it's going to be a nice gameplay element. Okay, so I mentioned we want to do something to prevent the player from exploiting this where they could just get bonus after bonus. So really what I want it to be is if they get a bonus, I don't want them to be able to get another bonus. Actually, let me just ignore this for a second. I don't want them to get another bonus unless they eat a food pellet first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new variable. So I'll come up with a new variable, and this can be global for all sprites. And I'm going to call this variable bonus check. We'll go ahead and click OK. And so when I start game, I want to set that bonus check to 0. So 0, think of 0 as there hasn't been any bonus. So when I start the game, I'll go ahead and set bonus check to 0. And then what I'll do is I'll come down to when I start as a clone, and before this forever block, I'm just going to run a quick if control loop here. So if, and I want to just check and see if bonus check is 0. And so if, let's grab this equals here, and we'll use a 0 there, and we'll go to our variables and we'll grab that bonus check. So if bonus check equals 0, what I want to do is I just want to change bonus check by 1. So that's going to push it to 1. And that way, if you come in once you're at 0 and then you get a bonus, then you're suddenly going to reset that variable. So that variable is going to be 1. And then the way I'm going to use that is if the bonus check is currently 1, I'm not going to let you create a new bonus until it's again back to 0. So we're going to have a check to make sure there isn't an existing bonus that's been consumed or that's appeared on screen before the player has eaten food. So you're going to have to eat food after a bonus to make sure you can get another bonus. So to complete the other part of this, if we go over to the food here, we'll notice that we're forever running and checking if it is touching, and if so, we're going to broadcast eat food. So let's just go to that eat food here on the main stage here. And so if eat food, we're playing this shop sound, we're changing these things. And so then let's just also make a check here. So we know this happens just after we've eaten food. So if I just put another control check in here, and it's just going to be a simple if bonus check. And so if it comes in here as greater than 0, so let's see, let's come in here and let's grab this greater than. So if bonus check is greater than 0, so we'll grab our bonus check variable. We'll stick that in there. If bonus check is greater than 0, then what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take it down and reset it back to 0. So I'll just set bonus check back to 0. I could also use the subtract, 1 from it, but we're just going to set it back to 0 if it's greater than 0 after we've eaten the food. And again, we're using that 0 control just as a check to make sure the player is allowed to receive another bonus. So I'll just put all of this in here right before the score update, well, just anywhere in here. So somewhere like that. So if bonus check, we're just going to set that back, broadcast score update. Okay, so that should be in place, but we have to use this now to determine whether we create a new clone of this multiplier. And so the final part of this, you'll remember that it was actually over here on the backdrop where when we started game here, we set this multiplier and then forever it's checking to see if the timer is greater than the multiplier, and then we create the clone of multiplier. But now remember, we're only going to create the clone of that multiplier if the bonus check equals 0. So what I'm going to do is just grab another little if block here, and we'll drag that out. And I'm going to go ahead and take this part here, and I want this to be in there, and then this should actually be nested within this block. And then below that if, that's where we're going to have the reset timer. But in here, we're going to have this operator here equals, and then this will be 0, and this will be our bonus check. So bonus check, if bonus check equals 0. So you may have noticed that right now I just reset this random number generator just so every 3 seconds, and I have that on my multiplier too, every 3 seconds it's going to be generating a bonus, a multiplier bonus, or multiplier opportunity. But it should only do so now because of that new bonus check code, which we can see here, if I have bonus check at 0. So let's watch and see if this works. So bonus check is 0, so it's going to create a multiplier there, but once that disappears, if I just keep going around the screen, because bonus check is now 1, it's not going to generate another bonus for me unless I get that bonus check back to 0. Now how do I do that? I go ahead and I eat something there, and so you see now I have my bonus check back to 0, and see there's another bonus opportunity. But if I don't eat that multiplier, I can keep going around. Since my bonus check is at 1, it's not creating any more multipliers. But so go ahead, if I eat one, then slowly now after a few seconds, there we go. So this seems to be working, so that gives this other gameplay element, which I think is pretty cool. So I'll go ahead and stop this right here, and we'll go ahead and exit out of this. But so that's going to be a cool bonus in the game. So I'll go ahead and change this back to 10 to 30. And again, since this is in multiple places, maybe I should have a variable, but I guess since it's only in these 2 places, and I'm probably not going to change this again, I'm just going to leave it alone for now. But these are decisions you have to make as you design a game. And so let's continue on and see what else we have to do here. Okay, so let's stop part 3 of this tutorial right there. Now there is one more part coming, so you can check that out by following the link above or the link in the description down below. Again, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you found this video helpful, and I will talk to you soon.